Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 261, which features the first half of a two-part conversation with my new friends Greg and Cathy Buffkin. I first connected with Greg through his own podcast, and as we visited, I knew their story needed to be shared with our listeners. Today, the Buffkins share about their life in South Carolina, reminisce about raising their two children, and celebrate the joy and laughter their son Ryan brought to everyone around him, even as he lived with struggles that were hidden from view. With grace and honesty, they speak about the complexities of suicide loss, the misconceptions surrounding it, and the comfort they found in knowing that Ryan loved the Lord and is with him now. This conversation offers insight, hope, and the reassurance that even in the darkest moments, God is near. Hi, Greg and Cathy. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, Jill.
Hey.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I have been looking forward to our conversation ever since I had the chance to visit with you, Greg, on your podcast. And I want to get started by giving you the opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about yourselves. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Okay. Ladies first.
Well, we live in Florence, South Carolina, and I've been here since I was 2 years old. So this has always been home. Graduated from Francis Marion University, which is here in Florence, with a degree in education. Taught for 30 years and retired in 2007. We got married. Well, actually, we met 50 years ago this summer when I was living at the beach. And we got married in 1977, and we have a daughter, Whitney, born in 1980, and our son, Ryan, was born in 1989. And we're both retired now, so it's been great.
Yeah.
Yeah, enjoying retirement, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
Retirement is good. Yeah.
You recommend it?
We
Oh,
do.
absolutely.
We do.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Greg? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've lived here since I was 12. My family moved here from North Carolina. So I basically grew up here as well, and also graduated Francis Marion University with a psychology degree, but somehow or other ended up in the pharmaceutical industry and retired from that industry 5 years ago. So now my career is still navigating retirement and doing a podcast and just enjoying life together. And we have friends that we love hanging out with, and we have a small group at our church that meets over here on Thursday nights, and so we stay pretty active.
We also have 2 grandchildren. Whitney
Yes.
has a son, Eli, who is 15, and Ryan's daughter, Olivia, is 10. So Eli and Whitney live close to us here in Florence. Olivia is near Charleston, so that's not very far away.
Yeah. Very good. Sounds like a good life for you
Yep.
guys right now.
We are very blessed.
We are blessed,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Now we're here today to talk about your son, Ryan. Would you tell us a little bit about him? Help us get to know him.
Ryan was every baby is a miracle.
That's right.
But Ryan truly was a miracle. We had Whitney in 1980, had 2 miscarriages after we had her, and then had Ryan in 1989. So she was almost 10 years old when we had Ryan, and he was just her toy. So, she was like a little mom, and he was such a joy, such a joy. Just a funny, funny little guy, and brought such joy to everybody in the family.
One of his favorite things in life was to entertain Whitney.
Yes.
When he was growing up. And to make her laugh and to make us laugh.
Yeah. That was his goal, was to make everybody laugh. And he did such a good job.
He really did.
He was very
rambunctious.
Very rambunctious, yes. But very tenderhearted.
Yeah.
He was very, very tenderhearted and compassionate and very intuitive when it came to knowing what other people's feelings were, reacting to their emotions. And he just was a very cool kid, and a very wonderful and talented young man.
And a daredevil.
Yes. We spent many, or I did for the most part, spent many times in the emergency room.
We joke about if we had gone very many more times, that they were going to put a plaque over one of the exam rooms with Ryan's name on it.
Yeah.
Because we had been so many times, because he knew no fear whatsoever.
Wow.
Absolutely not. From the time he was little until, through high school. He just, he knew no fear. And so we paid the price for that.
Yeah, but it sounds like you made a lot of really great memories with him.
We did.
We did. Absolutely.
We absolutely did. Yeah.
Yeah. We still, when we get together with friends, it's been 10 years in October that we lost him, but we still, in almost every conversation without exception, Ryan's name will come up in one way, shape, or form. And it's usually something funny that he said or did that it was hard to talk about, for the first several months. But now when we think about Ryan, it just makes us smile. And a lot of times we still get some of the biggest laughs.
Yep.
And we know that he's entertaining in heaven.
Yeah.
Keeping him busy there, isn't he?
I think so.
God made him that way.
Yep.
That's right. And yeah, you're right. That is the way God made him. And that's what made him so special. I love that. So talk about what happened in the fall of 2015.
So in the fall of 2015, by that point, Ryan and Catherine, his sweet, beautiful wife, had been married for, I think, 3 years at that point. Mm-hmm. And Olivia had been born in January. So at this point, she's 8 or 9 months old. And living 2 hours away, being married, you don't always share everything with your parents. And I think Ryan knew that he had put us through a lot of challenges when he was in his teens. And so I think there were a lot of things he just didn't share as a result of that. But we had a great relationship with him. And he struggled with depression and anxiety. But to his credit, he was being treated by a psychiatrist for the depression and anxiety. He was seeing a family doctor on a regular basis. He was seeing a counselor with regularity. So he was doing all the right things, and they had prescribed an antidepressant, and they prescribed something for the anxiety. He was taking the initiative to do what he was supposed to do as much as he could. There were things in Ryan's past that we didn't know about until about 3 years later that we believe played very strongly into the battles that he was dealing with. And we feel like that fall, that it was kind of the perfect storm came together in his life He had had an injury at work and severed one of his fingertips. And the hand surgeon, to his credit, was able to reattach it. But of course, it meant pain meds. And a few months before we lost him, Ryan shared with me one day that he had, and of course, it's always Percocet. You can just about bank on it.
Sure.
And it's very addictive. So he told me that he had started liking the Percocet too much and had become, I think, fairly dependent upon it. But he also shared in that same conversation that he had already had a conversation with one of his doctors, and they were going to wean him off of it over the course of several weeks. And that's exactly what they did. But that played into it. And when I mentioned that 3 years later we found out something that was, we believe, probably might have been even maybe the biggest factor in what led to him taking his own life, and that was, we discovered through a conversation that Whitney had with a friend of his, that when he was young, and we don't know what age, because we didn't know anything about it, he was molested, and we don't know for how long, but we do know who the culprit was, and it was my own father.
Oh.
A grandfather that, a child and parents should be able to trust.
Sure.
And so, when people do things like that, when they're, in my opinion, basically predators, they always threaten the children that if they tell anybody that something bad's going to happen to them, as well as, their parent or, some other trusted adult in their life. And as a consequence, they bury it and try to deal with it themselves. And again, not knowing about it, when we found this out, it was like losing him all over again.
Sure.
Because we couldn't do anything about it. My father had already died at that point. But that was incredibly hard. And he told this friend that he had never even shared it with a single other individual. So not even his doctors.
Or his wife.
That's a heavy, heavy secret to carry.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess Jill, when we found out about this storm that I referred to, it was on a Wednesday night, I believe. Our small group actually had just arrived. Everybody was kind of coming in. We were getting something to eat. And we get a phone call from Cathy's sister, who also lives in Charleston. And she told us that Ryan had left Catherine and Olivia. He had met somebody at work. I mean, this was a total shock to us.
Yeah.
So this was Wednesday. On Friday, we found out that the two of them left Charleston to drive to Michigan, where she was from. She was working with him, but her family still lived in Michigan. And on that Saturday night, about midnight, is when he took his own life. And so there's a lot of gaps there that we just don't have answers for.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
Yeah. I can't even imagine what all you guys have gone through with all of that. Was it after his death that you found out about the abuse?
Yes.
Yeah, about 3 years after.
Yeah, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, 3 years went by, and we did not know about that. And it was just you say coincidence, but that Whitney found out, our daughter found out about it. And we later found out that the same thing happened to her.
And two nephews.
So there was a lot of damage.
Yeah.
That, of course, we were never aware of.
No.
And we were, kind of just feeling like we were kind of beginning to be able to live again and really just kind of have some normalcy, in our lives. And then, I'll never forget the day that Whitney called me on the phone on the way home from work and told me that. to say I was devastated and to say that we were devastated is an incredible understatement.
Sure, sure. I'm so sorry that's part of your story and that's part of Ryan's story.
Thank you, Jill. Yeah.
And Whitney as well.
Whitney.
We are too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Devastating. So regarding suicide loss, do you feel like there are issues that a parent who loses a child to suicide has to deal with that can complicate the grief journey?
I would say definitely, because suicide is one of those things that you just don't talk about.
The church doesn't talk about very much.
Nope. And there are a lot of people who, still believe that if you are if you commit suicide, there's no way you're going to go to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And that is absolutely, without a doubt, not true. Ryan was a believer. He accepted Jesus into his heart when he was a young boy.
5 years old.
So we know where he is.
That's right.
And we know that Jesus loved him all through those struggles that he had, all those years that we did not know about. And we know that Jesus was with him when he made that decision to take his life.
Yeah.
And most people don't know how to handle parents who have lost a child to suicide. I mean, it's just, before it happened to us, we wouldn't have known what to say, what to do. It's just one of those really, really difficult situations for other people to handle.
Yeah. I want to say this to any parent who's listening who has lost a child to suicide. Despite what some people think, it is not that one unforgivable sin.
No, it's not.
Some people in the past, I don't think it's as prevalent. That thought is as prevalent today as it once was, like when we were growing up. It is not the unforgivable sin. Jesus forgave us of our sins, past, present, and future. And there is, Romans 8:38 tells us that there is nothing, to summarize it, basically nothing in all of creation that can separate us from his love.
Right.
So I want other parents who are struggling to know that, and you never know if you're not sure that your child was saved, you never know in a moment when that child might have turned to Jesus and received him into their lives. And it might have been in the second before they took their life. Only he knows that.
That's right. My friends Todd and Melissa Schaefer, who lost their son to suicide as well, they talk about that. And Melissa in particular talks about the thief on the cross.
Yep.
Yeah.
Who came to Jesus in those final moments. And he's in heaven today.
Absolutely.
But his mother, the mother of the thief on the cross, the father of the thief on the cross, never knew about that conversation that her son had with Jesus.
That is such
exactly
a good point.
That. Yes.
And he never had a chance to go to a Bible study, a small group. He didn't even get to read God's word.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. So that's a comfort. I always think of Romans 8:1 as well. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
Absolutely.
So your son knew the Lord.
Yes.
And so there's no condemnation. That's what God's word tells us. Yeah. But I'm glad that you're talking about this, because I do think that's a misconception that many people have, is that suicide is the unforgivable sin. You commit suicide, and I don't even like the word commit with suicide, but that's what our culture says.
Right.
That does not mean that they are not going to heaven.
No. For me, it actually took me about 5 years before I could even use the word suicide in my vocabulary. I just could not bring myself to say it. Not because I was ashamed or felt like there was a stigma for us. It felt too cold.
Mm.
And it just felt like a very cold word and that carried a very cold meaning as opposed to taking one's own life. And so that was the vocabulary that I chose to use instead.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I always heard commit suicide, that phrase.
I did too.
And like I said, we don't use that anymore. We use died by suicide, just because that word commit is so harsh. And we try to use that term at our retreats, and I think a lot of people are beginning to adopt that
I think so.
phraseology.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah,
I think so too. And to your original question, we need to talk more about suicidal ideation and suicidal tendencies and take it more seriously, because the latest statistics, I think from 2023, indicated that every 7 minutes in this country, somebody takes their own life. Those are the ones who actually are successful. But there are, according to the statistics, there are millions of others who have either attempted and failed or have thought about it. And it's something that we need to be more proactive in the church talking about and dealing with, because it's something that in our culture that is very real, and I think it indicates things in our culture that are causing young people to feel hopeless.
Mm. Yeah.
And so, when somebody gets to that point of feeling like there is no other way than taking their own life, then we have failed them in some respects. And unfortunately, parents aren't always privy to knowing what's going on in their children's thoughts.
Right. Unless they choose to share it with us, we
Right.
can't know.
right.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
Ryan's an adult. He's living on his own. There's no way you could have known what was in his mind. And like you said, he was doing all of the right things. He was seeking help. He was, taking medication. He was following through with appointments and things like that. This fall will mark 10 years, right?
It will.
Since Ryan went to heaven. How do you feel like your grief has evolved through those years?
To be honest, after Ryan passed away, I experienced a lot of anger and anguish. It was it was just almost unbearable. The pain and the loss and the trauma. And the only thing I knew to do was to take it out on God.
Sure.
And so I had a lot of questions, of course. I tried not to be angry with God, but at the same time that was the only way I could deal with it at the time. The sadness and the hurt, being a mom, you carry that child for 9 months and you watch that child grow up and become, a young adult. And then all of a sudden, especially with suicide, it's just instant. They're gone.
Right.
And so it took a long time for me to start the healing process. It didn't start immediately. I guess it was probably after maybe Ryan died in late October, and it was probably right after Christmas, maybe, that I decided to. I've never been a person to journal. People would give me journals for gifts and all this, and I was just like, nah, I just don't, I can't get into that. But I finally thought maybe instead of journaling, maybe I think I will just write letters to Ryan. And so that's what I did for the first year after he passed away. I, at least every day or every other day, would write a letter to him. And I have to say that helped a lot. It wasn't necessarily journaling, it was writing letters to him. So I have several small notebooks that I have, and I have not I have not gone back and looked at them, after that first year. But Greg knows where they are, and I hope one day to be able to share those with him. So,
Sure.
and with Whitney.
Yeah.
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 I read, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 of them about a year ago. And I mean, it just, there's almost no words. I mean, Ryan and Cathy had such a special relationship to begin with because they're so much alike. It's amazing. So their relationship as mom and son just always did my heart good to watch them interact. I mean, sometimes yes, they did butt heads
Well,
because
sure.
they both may be somewhat stubborn in a few respects, but they just had the sweetest relationship. They loved the same kind of music, and they were always talking about different songs and that they liked, and yeah, individuals and bands that that they had loved in common. So I tried to convince her to publish those letters, like Letters to Ryan as the title.
Sure. Uh-huh.
But for her, it's too private.
Yeah.
And I appreciate and honor that.
Yeah. Those are just between me and my boy.
That's right. Yeah, I understand that. How about you, Greg? How has your grief evolved over the last 10 years?
I would say that it has evolved significantly. Like Cathy, I was devastated when we lost him because I would have never in a million years suspected that Ryan would have taken his own life because we all had such good relationships. I always thought that we could talk about any or everything. But as I said, when you get married, you don't lean quite as much on your parents any longer. And in this case, we discovered that he really was not leaning on Catherine as much either, just keeping a lot of it to himself. So I was very blessed, Jill, in that the company that I worked for at the time, I had 2 female managers, my direct manager and then her manager. And they were so incredibly compassionate and kind and helped arrange for me to take the time off that that we needed together. And so it's a bit out of the ordinary, but I had 2 months, which spanned the last week of October all the way through the beginning or the first week of January when I went back to work. And I will always be so very thankful that was a gift. I mean, it really was a gift. I just think God's hand was all over that because being a pharmaceutical rep, I was in doctors' offices all day long talking to them and their nurses and their staff. And in that role, you always have to be quote unquote on,
Yes, that's right.
And so it gave us time to grieve together. It gave us time to figure out how to navigate Thanksgiving and Christmas, which just seemed like it was going to be impossible. And Cathy had to have some surgery right in the middle of all of that. So, God was so good to us during that time. And so when I went back to work, every single day, I was sharing our story because by the time I went back to work, most of my physicians and their staff knew about what had happened. I had been calling on the vast majority of them at that point about 30 years. And Ryan had even gone with me when he was little to some of those offices during the summer when he was out of school. So they knew who he was. And for me, even though I dreaded going back, in retrospect, it really was one of the ways that God helped heal me, and probably more quickly than I would have otherwise. And that was being in a position where I had to share our story every day, multiple times for a few months. And at first it was hard, and it was, it was a bit emotional, but it really did speed my healing process. And for your listeners, I would encourage you, when you have an opportunity to talk about your child and share your story, take advantage of it. And for those who are listening who haven't lost a child but are in that person's life who has lost a child, please ask about their child. You wouldn't believe what it does to a parent's heart, a grieving parent's heart, to hear somebody else say their child's name. And if you know, if there's something you want to share about that child, a funny story or an experience that you shared, ask them if they would mind if you do that. Because you guys know.
Oh, sure. Yes.
It is just, it warms the parent's heart like few other things can. So for me, fast forward today, 10 years later, that's the only way that I can do what I do, which is what you're doing, having a podcast where other grieving parents come and share their stories, and we have these same kind of conversations. And we were able to, to start a ministry to help.
Mm-hmm.
And 10 years ago, I would have never, ever thought that we would be able to do anything like that, even though we wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to see in those early weeks and months. You're just focusing on the next breath, the next moment, the next day. You can't even see into the future very far. But then when you look back from 10 years, you're like, wow, God really worked even in those early weeks and months to get you to where you are today.
He does. And I go back to Romans 8:28 all the time, because mentally I knew what that scripture said before we lost Ryan. But in the years since we lost him, and for those who aren't familiar with the verse, it says that in all things God works together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And you can't see that when you're in that early season of grief and you're in shock and you're just traumatized. But in retrospect, the things that we can see now, the good that God has brought out of something that just seems like it would be impossible for it to happen, he has in so many ways. And for us, it means that Ryan continues to touch other people's lives in all different parts of the world, because we can share his story and we can keep his memory alive. And so, God is touching people because of his story that he would never have been able to reach.
As we wrap up this first half of my conversation with Greg and Cathy, we've had the privilege of hearing about their son, Ryan, his joyful spirit, his deep sensitivity, and the struggles he carried quietly. Greg and Cathy have shared with honesty and grace about the heartbreak of losing him to suicide and the comfort they found in knowing he is with the Lord. In next week's episode, we'll talk about how their grief has changed over the past 10 years, the unique impact of sibling loss on their surviving daughter, and the ways God has brought healing and purpose through their pain. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.